Command Point now has merch. Link in the description. Warzone Studio was kind enough to send out a couple of their battle mats for us to review, and I have to say, you guys, I absolutely love them. The mats we received have the kill team layout on them, making it quicker and easier to place objectives and terrain pieces to create a good play experience. The mousepad material the mats are made from is an upgrade from the foldable cardstock boards that you are used to seeing come in kill team boxes. Warzone Studio are even helping support the channel by giving us a kickback for each order placed using the link in the description below. So make sure to check them out, and thank you to Warzone Studio for sponsoring this video.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Command Point, and welcome to the 11th day of Kill Team, where today we are going to be talking about a very interesting breed of the elf variety, the pain-loving elf variety, the Hand of the Archon, and I'm joined by none other than Chris Baki. Chris, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Happy to be here, Shane. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Chris, you're one of our few returnees from last year. I believe we talked about Blooded, was it?
That's right. I'm glad I made the cut to come back, and it's been great to see a huge uptake on Blooded since then. Multiple people took them to Worlds, which is really neat to see.
Yeah, Blooded has become very popular. Maybe in a year from now, Hand of the Archon is going to be in the same category, but didn't see any at Worlds, I don't think, unfortunately.
I think Hand might be in a little bit of a different bucket than Blooded were, but we'll get into it.
Yeah, well, I guess to start off, from a general sense, let's say somebody's getting into Hand of the Archon, they really like Drakari, and this is the main option for them in Kill Team. As somebody that's played them quite a bit, how would you kind of go into describing their general play style?
That's a fascinating question. I think the easy thing to say would be glass cannon, but I think that's a little bit too vague and broad to really articulate it. I think the better way to put it is they're a momentum team. Hand of the Archon sort of struggle to build that momentum, and once they have it, once everything's in full swing, and once they've gotten those kills out that they need, it can be a truly terrifying engine to behold. So I think that's something, if you like sort of building up and having your operatives get more powerful over the course of the game, while at the same time having them all be very fragile, Hand of the Archon is a great pick for you.
Okay. So, Chris, tell me why, as a competitive player, why was it a good pick for you? Because you played them for quite a bit. So, what about that playstyle that you just described to me appealed to you personally?
Well, I definitely wanted to try what we call sort of a mid-range team. That is a team that has a sort of a not a horde and not an elite team. And I was also coming off a sting of very challenging games where I was running blooded and running into teams like Otherpox, where I felt like having to have a play style where I was really forced into very melee focused was very challenging to me. And so I was looking for a team that had a little bit more of a ranged focus overall to it, and that's definitely Hand of the Archon. When you compare Hand of the Archon to Corsairs, they're very similar teams. But Corsairs lean a little bit harder into doing their work really close range, and I guess a little bit ironically, given the lore for Hand of the Archon, Hand of the Archon like a little more keep away. They really like to be able to gun their targets down and have really asymmetric engagements.
Okay, very interesting. So, one of my favorite questions to go into here, and I asked this last year, and I think I'm a little more interested in the answers to this question this year, but I think a really tricky part of learning a new faction is approaching turn one and figuring out what you want to do, what your win conditions are, what your capabilities are, and identifying situations where you change up your game plan. But for you, with Hand of the Archon, what is your general approach to Turning Point One?
Well, there's a few things to keep in mind for turning point one, and probably the biggest one, and I'm sure this isn't going to be the only time that this is discussed, is figuring out what you're going to do with the torment grenade. So, for those of you who aren't aware, Hand of the Archon has an operative that can basically poison and perma injury any operative that the grenade that they throw touches. This is an incredibly powerful ability. This grenade basically goes through walls on open. It has a massive area of effect, and there's not much, if anything, your opponent can do to stop it. So turning point one for Hand of the Archon is a whole lot of different things that you're considering as a player. Really starting with the strategic ploy phase and going into how you maneuver your operatives. One of the biggest questions that you'll have as a Hand of the Archon player in Turning Point One is whether or not you're going to use cunning. That is the ability that the leader has to pass on your first opportunity and if you do that, you gain a command point. Now, the counterplay to this ability is if your opponent passes right after you, you don't get to play ploys. So this is a really double-edged sword because you can potentially be screwing yourself out of the use of Fleet of Foot Turning Point 1, which can potentially ruin your game plan altogether. So when I'm approaching Turning Point 1 for Hand of the Archon, I'm really considering, do I need Fleet of Foot to do what I need to do? And a big question mark for that is, how hard is it for me to get these Turning Point 1 objectives? Are there objectives in the middle of the board? Is the mission something like loot or secure, where I'll need to do a mission action when I get there? If so, I really, really need to make sure I turn on Fleet of Foot. And then using Cunning is pretty risky, right? Do I really need that CP, or would I rather spend that CP, make sure that I can turn on Fleet of Foot? So that's probably one of the biggest just off the bat decisions I need to make. From there, there's a few other things I'm thinking about turning one. A lot of it is that Torment Grenade delivery system. And basically the way I think about it is I'm either doing it the first activation or I'm doing it the last activation of the first turn. If I'm doing it the first activation, I'm generally going to be recon dashing my Torment Grenadier up, the Disciple of Yolindra, I think the operative's called.
Yeah.
I'm generally going to recon dash this operative up. The Disciple's going to be on Conceal, and I'm going to be sort of looking around for a board position where I can keep this operative safe while also chucking this awful, awful grenade and hitting as many enemy operatives as I can. Generally, players that have experienced the Hand of the Archon are going to do a pretty good job not giving you this great drop at the start of the game where you get to injure and perma damage and injure a lot of their operatives. And so then you sort of shift this into phase 2 of the plan, which is you're going to make your Disciple of Yolindra the last activation of the first turning point once everyone's in their final positions, and then you'll basically get to throw this operative out there, uncontested usually, and get to throw that grenade wherever you want. So that's one of the big things you're setting up in turning point 1. A couple other things are making sure that your 2 melee operatives move upfield in a position where they can really leverage their abilities for the next turn. And then also getting your gunners in position, your blaster or shredder, making sure that if you can take a safe shot that you do. Otherwise, making sure that they're in a great spot for next turn and turning point 2 when things really open up.
Awesome. Phenomenal answer. Very, very detailed. Super interesting. So I guess let's turn the page a little bit and let's talk about, for you, Chris, when you think about the times in the past when you've played Archon, whether it's at a tournament or at your local store, whichever, can you describe to me what pops into your mind when I ask you to draw up the spiciest, flashiest Hand of the Archon play that you've ever done?
Well, there's a few of those.
Yeah.
Definitely some plays later on in the game if you can keep your Crimson Duelist alive. This operative can absolutely swing games. Your Crimson Duelist has the ability after she kills something to choose an enemy in 6 inches, and then they can no longer pick up or perform mission actions. Later in the game, when there's fewer and fewer activations left on the table, if you can get a good charge off with the Crimson Duelist, you can potentially kill 2 different models and then have a third one be unable to do mission actions or pick up. Very often, your opponents will have some sort of dedicated operative that's going to be doing that, and that's sort of their sole purpose. Think, for example, a Glitchling for Gellerpox, and being able to say no, not only can you not do mission actions, you can't even control objectives is absolutely brutal. The Crimson Duelist is an absolute massive swing power piece if you can keep her alive. Probably one of the most notable sort of game swinging moves was getting my Flayer, which is sort of like a rack model, up there with the Feel No Pain against a series of injured Gellerpox Hulks. So this is a game at BAO this year where I had thrown a Torment Grenade during the first turn. I caught a few Hulks. I caught a few of the Glitchlings. It was absolutely brutal. And by around turning point 2, turning point 3, these injured Hulks ended up charging into my Flayer. And through a combination of good rolls on my part, good Feel No Pains, and the damage reduction, my Flayer ended up actually surviving to the end of the game with 1 wound left, after having taken down and finished off 2 different Nightmare Hulks, 2 different mutants, 3 Glitchlings, and a few of the grubs. It was an absolutely phenomenal performance by a lot of fight actions that my opponent was trying to do to just bring this Flayer down. Kept getting diced out of it, and this thing racked up quite the kill count and kept using those pain tokens to maneuver around, get more APL. It was awesome. So that was definitely a standout moment for me, as the Flayer racking up an absolutely absurd number of kills in the game.
Very nice. Very cool. So I guess in terms of like play styles, what would you say that Hand of the Archon struggle against? And I guess on the other side of it, what are they good against? So obviously there's stuff like commandos that, pretty good against most things right now, but everything changes in just a span of a few months, so you never know. So what is it from, I guess, stylistically that Hand of the Archon run into troubles with?
Yeah, I think my answer to that is going to be I actually think they struggle with a specific team that not a lot of other teams have a very specific problem with, and I think Void Dancers are specifically a huge problem for Hand of the Archon. Hand of the Archon have generally want to they deliver a lot of damage early with all their very mobile ranged assets,
Mhm.
and the Void Dancer's ability to just completely shut that down with Domino Field, maneuver themselves well, and pick really really good fights for themselves is a huge problem for Archon. And while Archon can get a lot of reliable crit engine stuff going, Void Dancers are still just a problem for that team in general. So that's definitely a big one, a big matchup that when I run into, I worried about. Sort of a separate sort of type of game I think Hand of the Archon struggles with more than other factions of their type is Into the Dark. Unlike Corsairs, Hand of the Archon doesn't have native comms. The only way that they can get extra APL is through killing stuff, which is awesome. But the problem with that is at the start of an Into the Dark game, all those doors are closed and those mission actions are expensive, and your entire team is only 2 APL. Now, it makes sense why that is because they got a lot of really cool abilities. That can really become a problem, especially against teams, for example, like Phobos, where they have native 3 APL and get those free actions going. So it can be pretty gnarly to deal with that. But I think generally, Hand of the Archon is a pretty nice and even matchup spread. And aren't particularly too worried about those ranged hordes. They can handle teams like Felgor, now that Felgor can be killed by shooting, and they can handle elites pretty well as well. So generally, they have a pretty nice matchup spread, but can struggle a lot against Harlequins, and I've actually had some trouble with Corsairs as well.
Okay, very cool, very interesting. I mean, the Into the Dark shot makes a lot of sense. I've heard that from Archon players in the past, so it's good to hear elaboration on that. For you, I guess, and you at some point you were learning Hand of the Archon, and I'm sure in your local scene you've seen other people play Hand of the Archon, whether it be at tournaments or just at the store. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the most common mistake that you see from Hand of the Archon players? Something that, if they just stopped doing this one thing, it would make playing the faction just a whole lot easier, and it would help them kind of like develop themselves playing it competitively.
That's a good question. I guess there's a few answers I'd have. First off is the exocrint, who's going to give your whole team those combat drugs. I know how appealing the extra inch is. I really, really do. But you got to go with the feel no pain. And the thing that I remind people when we're talking about the feel no pain for your team is the feel no pain isn't for you. It's not for you to ever bank on getting those sixes. That's not why you take it. You take it because your opponent, every time they initiate a fight action, every time they shoot you, they have to be thinking, oh man, if I only got 2 4 damage hits in on this model, that might not be enough to kill them. I might need to do a CP reroll to get an extra hit in, right? You're forcing your opponent to think a lot harder about if that 8 damage they're delivering is going to be enough to take you down. And that is absolutely massive for the amount of mental load it adds to your opponent. And when you're saving on sixes there with 8 wounds, odds are you're going to get a ninth wound in and maybe a 10th. And I've absolutely had those drugs win games and swing the tide of really close matches. Another thing I see misplayed a lot is the assassin. The assassin has sort of two cornerstone abilities. First off is the omen, which can you basically pick an operative that the Sky Splinter assassin. I don't know what he's doing behind the scenes, but you either pick a friend and they can reroll all ones for attack and defense, or you pick an enemy and they have to reroll all sixes for attack and defense. I think when a lot of players look at this model, you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, I can really shut down an enemy model. I can make this sniper's life difficult, or I can make their gunner be a little less accurate. And while it's interesting, you're never gonna really be able to get as much mileage out of that as the agency you have buffing your own model. You just absolutely want to, with only a few exceptions that ever come to mind, you want to be buffing your own model with those reroll ones. You're just overall, it's going to deliver more for you and more reliably. And the second is really making use of the assassin's mark ability. And the way I play the assassin is really a sniper hunter. It's really, really good at taking care of those pesky silent snipers that are sitting up on a vantage point behind like cover. You just pop your assassin up to be on a vantage point as well, and then they're cross shooting across the map and being sort of like a budget discount spotter. So that ability to mark things is incredibly strong, and definitely look for ways to really leverage the ability to be a a self spotter, and adding that to your arsenal. So I think those are probably the two big things I'd call out.
Nice. I'm happy to hear you say that about the Omen, in terms of buffing your own guy rather than debuffing the enemy. I've always thought that was the right call, but it's nice to hear somebody else say that. So, um, all right, Chris, we're gonna move on to the most important question here. You may remember last year I asked people what their favorite Christmas song was. This year I'm turning it a little bit and I'm asking everybody, one by one, if you have one, what is your favorite Christmas movie?
Oh, it's got to be Die Hard.
Okay, that's been a really popular one, I'll have you know. You're not the first to say Die Hard, but
Well, I don't know if it counts, but maybe honorable mention for Gremlins. And I
oh,
don't even know if you consider that a Christmas movie. But that one also, just rewatched that a couple weeks ago, and it's just so goofy. I love it.
have you ever seen Gremlins 2?
I haven't.
It's an
I've only seen the first
absolutely insane movie. I don't even know what to tell you to prepare you for Gremlins 2, but you should go watch it. It's very interesting.
one. All right, I'll queue it up then. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for joining us. As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being one of our final guests here on the 2023 12 Days of Kill team. Thank you to all the subscribers, all the Patreon people for watching. You guys are the best. And happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Stay tuned tomorrow for the 12th Day of Kill team if you're interested in hearing about our favorite brand of undead robot zombies. So, until then, it is Chris and Shane signing out.